So 7 Deadly Sins, like many popular anime and manga, have a good chunk of supplementary material as well as spin-offs, and even to an extent, prequels. And what I'm talking to you guys about today is the technical prequel to the main story of the 7 Deadly Sins. If you weren't aware, 7 Deadly Sins had a 3-chapter prequel arc that takes place 12 years before the events of 7 Deadly Sins, which means only 2 years before the framing of the sins and them having to split up across Britannia and being hunted as most wanted criminals for the taking out of Zaratros, the Holy Knight Grand Master, or the head Holy Knight, who is Gil Thunder's father. So this is a very interesting time because we actively get to see the sins act like the 7 Deadly Sins before the events of the story. We get to see a mission that, in canon, is referred to multiple times, and twice it has been shown in the 7 Deadly Sins overall story. Obviously, we all know the Grudge of Edinburgh anime film sequel that bridges 7 Deadly Sins' finale with the start of Four Knights of the Apocalypse, with Tristan and Lancelot as the main characters of that two-parter film. But I will let you know this. Originally, the Vampires of Edinburgh mini-arc prequel was actually split up into 3 chapters that were released with each of the Blu-ray sets for 7 Deadly Sins in 2015. Part 1 of these chapters released in January of 2018 for the first part of the Blu-ray. The second part of the Blu-ray was February 25th, 2015, and the finale to Vampires of Edinburgh was in March of 2015 with the final part of this Blu-ray. And the interesting thing is that Escanor's first official appearance, we get his full debut in design, is on October 28th, 2015 with chapter 147, which is the chapter where Bond, Jericho, and Elaine are escaping from Galen and Velasco's pursuit and make it to the bar that Escanor for the last 10 years has been bartending as he lay low. And with those dates, something interesting about these 3-parters is that we actually not only get to see Escanor in night form, but his full day form and the measure they go to and the full reveal of Escanor's power and abilities is in this 3-part manga. This 3-part prequel that came out and concluded a full 7 months before Escanor's official release in the manga, his first true appearance, and later on his showcasing his abilities in the main manga. So if you were reading the 7 Deadly Sins manga weekly, but didn't purchase the Blu-rays at the time, you would not know that Escanor's first real appearance and first fight was in this 3-part prequel. And what makes this even more interesting is that for us here in the West, we not only get to see this Vampires of Edinburgh prequel story, but we also get some short stories, a character popularity poll, and the pilot for 7 Deadly Sins, the one-shot chapter pitch for the 7 Deadly Sins manga, which I've actually covered on this channel, I believe, now 2 years ago now, I believe, which I'll leave a link somewhere for you to go watch my full recap of that one-shot and how much I enjoyed it. But we got all that in the single volume 7 Deadly Sins Original Sin, which is available officially if you want to go read and get a physical copy or a digital copy, so you can read this for yourself. It is definitely worth it. But that's enough of the background and everything. How about we start by getting into what the actual story of Vampires of Edinburgh is and see the 7 Deadly Sins face off against these vampires. But I know what's in the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. It really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. More 7 Deadly Sins content outside of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse stuff, and my retrospective review will be coming in short order, so look forward to all of that. I have a lot of stuff planned for the rest of the year and going forward for this channel involving 7 Deadly Sins in Four Knights of the Apocalypse. But let's get started. Also, this is going to be different from my chapter reviews. I'm not going to go line by line. This is just going to be baseline summarizations of the events of this chapter and only speak on key lines that I enjoy and are very important. So the story starts off 12 years ago in Britannia in the Kingdom of Leonis, as a holy knight ends up appearing who is from Edinburgh, coming to get a request to see the king. And so they ask what's going on, as then one of the knights lifts his helmet and manages to bite one of Leonis' holy knights, draining their blood and turning them into a vampire. As now these vampires have entered the Leonis castle to try and turn Leonis into a new kingdom for vampires. But just as these vampires occur, 2 of them are completely knocked out with Purge by the Holy Knight Grand Master Zaratros, as he purifies 2 of the deceased Holy Knights as now they go to peace. But now the Holy Knight that has been turned into a vampire begins to try and fight back against Zaratros. But Zaratros easily dismembers him and uses Purge to free his spirit, with this Holy Knight thanking him for setting him free from living as one of the living dead. And Zaratros puts up the call for the 7 deadly sins to be gathered, as we see King in his old fart form talking to Merlin, talking about the resurrections of the vampires, and how they've kind of been in a sarcophagus sealed away for a long time, but something must have opened up this seal to have them start pouring out. And so they go to find Meliodas and Bon, as they see that they're staring down this gross monstrosity that's in front of Bon, as it's a meal that Meliodas started to cook. Honestly, in the matter of 12 years, the fact that Meliodas managed to go from serving this to stuff that actually looks like food, yet still tastes like an absolute biohazard, is a skill in and of itself, and shows that he is improving, at least in the appearance department. But yeah, Meliodas did this as a bet for Bon, since Bon lost, and now Bon has to eat it. But he ends up finding out something different for Bon to do, as we transition into the briefing room, as we not only see King Bartra, but we see Zaratros, along with Merlin, King, and Meliodas, Hendrickson, and Dreyfus, as they begin to discuss the vampires of Edinburgh, and their countermeasures on whether or not they should just send a full force on to try and take them on. But they go and take a look at Edinburgh through Merlin's crystal ball to get a look, as they are keeping the city in a state of perpetual darkness. And not only that, but the Vampire King's magic power has twisted and warped the space and time of this area. So the general area that's covered in perpetual darkness by the Vampire King has warped the space and kind of the time in terms of keeping it in perpetual darkness in the kingdom in and of itself, in order to help them with power. And Merlin says her teleportation abilities aren't going to work. Also, offhand line of Meliodas saying that Bon got away, and Hendrickson asking where Bon is, as he just laughs. So now we have to come up with a plan to take them on. And so Zaratros orders the 7 deadly sins to handle the vampires, and he requests for all 7 of them to go, showcasing the severity of the situation, while Dreyfus, him, and Hendrickson end up waiting along and protect Leonis with their holy knights in the stead of the 7 deadly sins, as they go and launch their own strike on the vampires. And I like how King is like, wait, all 7 of us? You mean we have to bring him too? And Meliodas asks Merlin what time it is right now, and at the time they're at the second, it is only a few minutes to midnight, as Meliodas says that this is perfect timing, and that they should get Gother and Diane and establish a beachhead at Edinburgh with Merlin and King, and Meliodas will be there in a second. King obviously is concerned with how strong they are, but they don't want to do a reckless attack. But Meliodas just says that this is the plan. When you don't know how strong the enemy is, don't let them know how strong you are as well. I love how Hendrickson is like, this is brilliant. Honestly, this is just how Gilthunder acts to anything Meliodas does. And I feel like this also shows how in the past, Hendrickson also kind of idolized the sins to a large degree before, his fall from grace and everything that happened with him. King just saying that it almost kind of makes sense to a degree, I guess. Keep your enemies guessing, I guess. It still goes both ways. And Merlin just laughs at this declaration. And so now Meliodas declares that the Sin's biggest strength is their teamwork, which is actually true. And so they all head out to their locations. But before Meliodas heads out, a young Elizabeth peeks out from her bedroom as Meliodas goes up and tells her that everything's going to be okay and that he is a friend of her father's. But before he tells her name, Veronica ends up coming in and takes her away, telling Elizabeth that Meliodas is just a big, big sinner. As Meliodas just has a wholesome smile, and then we cut over to Edinburgh, over 100 miles away. Honestly, with the timeline, Elizabeth is about 4 years old at this moment. And honestly, not a bad interaction, I guess, considering how we know now before we had this whole big revelation of who Elizabeth and Meliodas in terms of relation to each other is. This could just be seen as a relatively wholesome moment where Meliodas is trying to assure the princess that everything's going to be okay, considering that she woke up in the middle of the night. We all know what happens with Meliodas and Elizabeth in the future, but I'm not going to touch upon that in this video. Heck, I can touch upon that in an entirely different video if you guys really want to. But we cut to Edinburgh as it revealed that Bond was actually sent way ahead of everybody else as punishment for losing, to an extent, to kind of get the layout of the land in Edinburgh. And as he's walking around in full armor, the Vampire King and his royal family end up seeing that a Holy Knight has gotten into their area, and so they should probably see what they should do about that. And it's then that Bond ends up meeting a horde of vampires as they seem like they are about to overwhelm him. Obviously, people turn into vampires. But in an instant, Bond uses a salt hunt with his sacred treasure in order to instantly decapitate all of the vampires, putting an end to all of them, as he says, it's no fun offing everybody at once. And that catches the eye of the vampires. One in particular, who we will see later, ends up going off to try and encounter Bond. Bond's arm is then grabbed and he's flung into the side of the building, as we get the introduction of Orlandi, the Vampire Royal, and he's going to drink all of Bond's blood, according to what he says. Now, if we all remember, in 7 Deadly Sins, Orlandi is like a little one-eyed bat creature that is also present in Four Nights the Apocalypse, because he basically becomes Merlin's familiar, and we see how that happens here. So, this is what Orlandi looked like back when he was a full-fledged vampire before Merlin, turned him into a familiar. And as we'll begin to see, he really likes drinking blood. So he begins to puncture Bond's chest, and then all the blood just begins to spurt out in lines, as it then ends up getting drunk by Orlandi, as he ends up just absolutely loving it. I do like the silhouette and panel work that showcases Orlandi drinking Bond's blood to look legitimately horrifying. Not bad. I wish it could have been a bit bigger, taking a full big 2 panels in 1 page, but still gets the point across. But it's then that we cut to Meliodas as he's hauling around the sacred axe Rita, talking to Escanor, as we get to see the first appearance of nighttime Escanor in his baggy clothing and his skinny appearance. And no mustache. Escanor with no mustache it just feels wrong. He looks fine, but it just feels wrong, at least to me. But yeah, Meliodas tells Escanor something to work, with Escanor on a full page showcasing his appearance, obviously most likely surprising a good chunk of the audience when this first came out, as he says he's going to give it his best shot. As we transition to the next chapter, as Diane and King are currently staring at the castle of Edinburgh in full armor. But Diane is kind of sleepy until she ends up swatting a bug, but turns out to be a vampire, as she just casually smacks into the ground with no effort or regard to the vampire, and it's like, oh, it's not a bug? Okay, I'ma smash it. But then the vampire begins to regenerate, and King uses Chastieful to completely destroy him, because vampires do tend to regenerate. They're practically immortal, and the only way for you to get rid of them is to destroy their head or break its body down into millions of pieces. And so the vampires in the 7 Deadly Sins universe are incredibly tricky to get rid of, and it shows why there is legitimate concern, especially for the Holy Knights of this era, to deal with them, and it definitely was a smart decision to send the Sins in this respect. But King also mentions that he's worried about Bond, as we go back to him, as he's getting his blood sucked by Orlandi, as we see these tendrils popping out from his back, as he's continuously just sucking out all of Bond's blood. But these things, while invisible, we only get to see them because we're seeing Bond's blood circulate through it. It ends up having a bit of a neurological poison that paralyzes his targets, which means that Bond shouldn't be able to move, as Orlandi just keeps sucking him dry.
Wait, what did he just say?
And Orlandi is just in complete bliss over the sheer high quality of Bond's blood that also is endless. Obviously, because Bond is immortal, so he's never going to run out of blood. So, yeah, Orlandi's just going to make him his blood pack for endless amounts of high quality blood. But as he's salivating for it, as he's been waiting to enjoy good blood for like 3,000 years, Bond is just saying, man, wine is the best, as he's just getting drunk off his ass, drinking as much wine as he can, using Snatch to find the nearest bottle and just guzzle it down, as the paralysis isn't working on him. Which makes sense. He's immortal, he's got the fountain of youth, it endlessly heals him, so paralysis and poisons ain't gonna work on him. So Bond just destroys the tentacles that are just legitimately draining his blood, as he gets up, As we then see Orlandi just balloon in sheer size, most likely from drinking all of Bond's blood, and a combination of Bond also using Snatch to steal Orlandi's power. And so now Bond's ready for round 2, as with a singular, incredibly overpowered punch, just lands one massive blow on Orlandi as he just completely pops like a very bloody and meaty balloon. Kind of graphic if we actually saw the whole thing. We just see a bit of a blood spatter in a small panel to showcase he just completely turned into just a puddle of blood. But Meliodas and Escanor make it to the doorway to Edinburgh that Merlin created on the outskirts. So now they are here in an area of pure darkness, as Escanor is wondering where Merlin is, and yeah, Escanor simping over Merlin as always. The man deserves to be happy, but also talks down and belittles himself as he tends to do when he's in this state, with Meliodas just telling him that he should really have some more confidence in himself, especially with what his true power is capable of. But then Escanor just starts sobbing, saying that he's sorry for being born, as Meliodas is just like, yeah, this is kind of par for the course with Escanor at this point. He's used to Escanor's escapades and how he acts in nighttime form. But Meliodas walks into the darkness, telling Escanor that they should head up because space around them is distorted by the Vampire King's magic, and so they shouldn't be too far apart, as there's no telling where they could end up in this area. And Escanor, as he's trying to pull Rita out from the spot that Meliodas led it for, and remember, Escanor can only lift it in daytime form, so in night form, he literally cannot lift it a single inch. I really wish Escanor was capable of, like, holding Rita in nighttime form, showcasing the magic, just allowing him to use it whenever, but I guess it makes sense considering how his powers work. But Escanor is just jokingly telling Meliodas that with his luck, he'll end up finding the Vampire King boss in, like, the second he turns around. But when Escanor turns around, Meliodas is actually engulfed in darkness, and the two of them are separated. Meliodas is sent somewhere else, but Escanor gets a shiver down his spine, as behind him appears the Vampire King, staring down one of his intruders, asking who he is. As he introduces himself as the Vampire King, the ruler of vampires, Israf. And so he asks for Escanor to answer and give his name, as Escanor just says that they're Holy Knights of Leonis, the 7 deadly sins. And he also blabs that they're here to destroy the vampires. But the Vampire King just kind of scoffs it off, saying that the name is arrogant and childish, and it's very human, and that Escanor should be very wary of death. And so he has to be dealt with, and he's kind of disappointed that he kind of drew the short straw, obviously seeing Escanor right now in night form as the weakest. He motions his hands and destroys the rubble beneath Escanor, but all Escanor does is very quickly escape, showcasing that even though Escanor might not be strong, he's really good at running away in this state, so that's something we don't really get to see, which is nice. But hey, Israf is having fun chasing around the nighttime Escanor, so let's see what happens. We then cut back to Meliodas, as he realizes he's been separated from Escanor, even though it is kind of his fault for not staying next to the guy and just walking off in the distance while leaving him to carry a massively heavy object that he can't carry in this state that he's in right now, but Meliodas just ends up being Meliodas. But it's then that he encounters two vampires, and they seem to potentially know him. One of them in particular just says, "To think we would see you again," with Meliodas being like, Do I know you? As one of the vampires, whose name is Ren of the Black Nail, introduces herself, and the other is Gelda, Thousand Motes. And yeah, this is our first appearance of Gelda as well. Remember, in the mainline manga and anime, Gelda doesn't appear until, well, after the events of the fight with the Demon King. To manga readers, she probably just spawned more or less out of nowhere outside of the one instance with Zeldris and Meliodas during the Holy War arc, when Zeldris kind of revealed got revealed of his whole motivations. But Gelda appeared in the epilogue of that section of the story and didn't play a part until the end of the second round against the Demon King to help save Zeldris. So that whole segment of the manga was set up here in this 3-chapter prequel that you can only get when it came out in Japan on Blu-rays. And this is canon, so see what I mean when this arc being incredibly important that has not been adapted into the anime yet and is not, super accessible to people in the main manga, unfortunately. You have to go out of your way to get a separate volume, or in Japan, Blu-rays and stuff, or a fan book, in this case in Japan, that came out in 2018, which I forgot to mention at the beginning. But yeah, they say that for the sin of breaking their pact with them and entrapping them, she's going to have Meliodas pay with his life. And Meliodas just says that they're confusing him with somebody else, as he easily evades her attacks, but she evades one of his strikes from Lost Vein. And so they go blow for a quick second, but rather impressively, she does manage to land kind of a blow by splitting Meliodas' helmet in half and revealing his face. And so she says, yeah, you seem nothing like you did then, but I know that face. Saying that 3,000 years ago, they did not fall before his power. And you know it to be true, for you saw you could not defeat us and sealed us away instead. But Meliodas, still trying to say this case mistaken identity is, well, mistaken identity, she keeps lunging at them, as she then name drops Zeldris' name. Now, I believe at this point in the manga, the commandments were just getting released around the time when this bonus chapter came out to Blu-rays, I believe, if I'm correct. So, yeah, this is literally just more or less coinciding with what's going on in the manga with Zeldris and the commandments being released, and the relation to Meliodas. Now, Meliodas is surprised as Ren talks about Zeldris, but in an instance, Ren is just consumed by, I can only see as, flames, as she notices that it is Gelda that started to burn her. With an instant, her vampire comrade is dead, and so she goes over to Meliodas, saying she knows who he is, and that he's not Zeldris, and asks him for a favor, as he wants him to kill her, as she says this with a smile. Now in the main manga, we know why Gelda wants to die, as when she was released later on in the manga, she, revealed that she thought Zeldris was, well, dead. After awakening 3,000 years later, and no sign of the demons, she assumed that Zeldris had died during the Holy War, and so without being with him, she chose death instead. So that's why she was sealed in the first place, and this is why she wants Meliodas to kill her. This is something that nobody would know until the Demon King epilogue. So that is something. We then cut to King and Diane as they're fighting two more vampires of the royal family, as they are twin brothers, as they go over to fight King and Diane, with another hooded figure that's right next to them, and now it's a 2-on-3. But in this fight, they're basically feeling exhausted, like they're not using much power too, and it might be a cost of the, well, darkness in the air draining their magic. They're feeling weaker, their armor's feeling heavier. But as they're saying that they feel weak maybe because of the villain's powers, it's revealed that it is a fully drunk Bond using physical hunt to drain their strength as he passes out in a stupor, or at least just lies down in a stupor. And this was mentioned in the beginning of the manga, right after they met up with Gother. Gother revealed, again, the Edinburgh vampire incident, the fight against the Edinburgh vampires, that Bond used physical hunt on King and Diane because he felt like it and just wanted to screw with them in this fight. He won his fight, and he was like, this will just be pretty funny to do. A dick move by Bond. Granted, he was drunk, but it's Bond. He does stupid shit like this a lot, especially in the early days from what I can tell, and I still find this hilarious. But Merlin appears and takes Orlandi's severed eye as he is speaking through the eye, so he's still alive. And she puts him in a test tube, as we then later on to see in Seven Deadly Sins, and then for the Apocalypse, that he becomes her familiar, like I mentioned. Now, Bond is just saying that, hey, maybe we should go around. We never fought before. But Merlin just tells her, fine, but only if you do 100,000 push-ups right here, right now. And she makes Bond do that as he's super drunk, so that just distracts him for the rest of the time, and he most likely just passes out. But it's then that we cut back to Israf and Escanor, as he keeps pushing at Escanor, and Escanor runs away, until Escanor jumps up and stands his ground right next to Rita, saying that he's starting to feel like himself again and that dawn is coming. It's almost dawn. And even Israf notices that he seems different. He pushes Escanor back with a force of magical power, but Escanor plants his feet and stays standing. As he tells the Vampire King, "Is that all you got?" And the Vampire King just says, "Oh, bold words from a man who has done nothing but flee so far. Why should I use my true power on an insect like you?" As Escanor says that that's a fair point, but I must warn you that now is the last chance you get to be serious. And he says, "Allow me to try again." With Escanor now beginning to change into his daytime form, most likely his dawn form, if I'm being honest, as he tells in a singular page, looking really cool and confident, "Say sorry, apologize to me for being born into my world." As that ends chapter 2, with Escanor beginning to enter his daytime form. And that's where chapter 3 begins, as the Vampire King is actually kind of amused by Escanor, as he's like, "Okay, fine. As a reward, I'll show you my true power." As he engulfs Escanor in an energy full of darkness called impurity, and we see what it does to a small mouse. It literally disintegrates and decays half of the mouse as it's completely destroyed, and the wave is felt by everybody in the area, as Merlin ends up clocking out the combat power of the King of the Vampires at 4,890. You know, I forgot that this chapter was coming out in an era where 7DS Sins was really into power levels, which didn't make things less interesting at all. Yeah, that power levels in the series was a major mistake, but also kind of makes the Vampire King seem very weak in comparison to, well, the Sins in general, at least in terms of season 2 Sins for the most part, if I'm being honest. But yeah, the Vampire King is incredibly confident that he actually managed to take down Escanor with such ease, and that he's started to have a bit of fun. But then a ray of light begins to bubble within the impurity, and then a big flash of radiant light flashes forward and begins to burn the Vampire King, pushing him back, as he's wondering how this man could withstand his darkness. Nothing could do this, but he only did this through sheer force of will. As Escanor tells him that the darkness feared him, and it's just that. And the Vampire King isn't having it, because there's no way that the Vampire King's power could be just forced away by a mere human. But Escanor goes on to say that the Vampire King, "You can't throw a rock without hitting a king in this world. But I'm different. I'm a creature unique in this realm. The lion's cid of pride, the great Escanor." I really missed Escanor, man. I missed him just aura farming off the ass and just dropping these one-liners all the time against any opponent he sees that he's confident he'll take down. I miss it so much. But Israf goes over to try and hit a number of blows on Escanor, but Escanor then jumps away and motions his axe, cutting the left side of the Vampire King, as this confuses him, saying, "Oh, okay, cool, but hey, I can regenerate very well. This means nothing to me." But as he begins to regenerate, flames begin to burst out of his wound, as he is then engulfed on the left side as he's beginning to burn. As he's beginning to wonder if this is Escanor's true power, but begins to realize that this is no ordinary flame, and that the only thing that can really hurt him is the purgatorial flames of the demon tribe. But that's not the kind of magic he has, asking Escanor what is he. But then cut back to Merlin and Bon, as Bon passes out after doing 100k push-ups, and you then see Merlin looking over and down at King and Diane's fight as they're being pushed back by the vampire twins. As they're having a tough fight, they end up pushing them back. But as they're getting ready to fight, the smaller brother gets grabbed and squeezed to death by the larger ogre-looking brother. But in an instance, the guy was sliced from the head down, as they're wondering what's going on. As King and Diane look over at the hooded vampire, as we hear the word Jack, with this person saying, "Your bodies are no longer under your control." As these vampires are asking, why would you betray your own comrades? But then they begin to ask, wait, comrade, who are you? As the visage begins to fade away, as you get the reveal that Gother was pretending to be a vampire this entire fight, and he strikes his signature pose while in his old, massive, giant armor. as he introduces himself as the Goatskin of Lust on the battlefield. And so the vampire brothers are taken out, and King Diane asks him why did he disguise himself this whole time and then didn't participate in the fight. But Gothar's excuse is, fool your enemies, you have to fool your allies first. That's how things tend to go. But yeah, he should have shown up a bit sooner, but Gothar just wanted to make it more exciting to rescue them at the very end. We then cut back to Meliodas as he's talking to Gilda, as she's telling him what happened 3,000 years ago, and that the vampires tried to betray the Demon King's army during the Holy War. And for the traitor's actions, the entire vampire clan was sentenced to be put to death by Zeldris. And this is one of our introductions to Zeldris in the manga. But instead of killing them, he decided to seal them away. And this is a good sign of Zeldris' first real sign of rebellion against his, let's be honest, dick of a father, choosing not to kill the one he loves, but to seal her away, which makes sense why she appears later on in the manga, and why it plays such a big role, and why it's harkened back to. And so, after telling Meliodas all of this, tells him that they can't really fight destiny. Zeldris was a great demon, and she was a treacherous vampire. And now, after 3,000 years, she's just tired, and she doesn't have a purpose. The only thing she has is to drink blood and live on, but that's not much of a life for her. And that's why she asks Meliodas to kill her. And Meliodas, with a serious look on his face, says, I understand. As then a big strike of power erupts from the area that everybody can sense, as that was most likely Meliodas' power. Now at the time, we would assume that Meliodas did kill Gelda, but we learn later on that he just resealed her to potentially keep her alive in case, Zeldris would be unsealed. Yeah, either way, I mean, look, it didn't happen on screen, so you don't know if he actually killed her or not at the time, but still, it's an interesting thing to think about. But as the Sins sense Meliodas' power, they also sense Escanor's power just radiating from the South Tower. And it's then that Merlin appears, telling Diane and King to leave and head back to Leonis, and that Escanor and the captain are still fighting. And so for now, Gothar's going to have to stay here with Merlin to set up the usual arrangements, which we'll get into later. But it's then that we cut back to Escanor's fight with the Vampire King, as he engulfs himself in a darkness called Black Full Plate. And as he engulfs himself in this plate to try and give himself a power boost with the powers of darkness that he has, Escanor just instantly wipes it away with his flames. As his whole armor of darkness was destroyed, it's supposed to resist the flames of purgatory, but it's still burned, as he notices that something is wrong, as he asks where this power is coming from and what spurs this transformation in Escanor. As we get a full page of daytime Escanor fully, buff, as he begins to say one of his signature poems, and man, the air around him is insane. This is the first time we're truly seeing daytime Escanor, and this is him most likely close to noon. And the area is steaming from his sheer presence. And the Vampire King is just terrified of Escanor right now, as he's asking what kind of spell Escanor is casting. But Escanor says, oh, I'm not casting a spell, I'm just saying a poem. And the Vampire King knows that he's dead. As Merlin then begins to narrate and tell us, the audience, the true name and power of Escanor's magic, saying that it's completely instinctive, he was born with it. Is it a spell, a divine blessing? Nobody really knows. But it's different from magics used by various tribes and races. It is the root of all life, sunshine. At midnight, Escanor's combat class is the least of any holy knight, but as day dawns, his power grows hour by hour until it reaches its zenith at noon. His combat class then easily eclipses that of all the other sins combined. But there's only one problem. Yeah, this is the first time we're getting the actual reveal and explanation of Escanor's ability. Now obviously we find out that Escanor's power is the grace of sunshine that used to belong to Mael, that ended up finding its way to Escanor somehow, some way. But still, I like the mystery that was being built up in this section, but the Vampire King begins to burn away as he realizes that he can't speak due to his throat being burned, and he can't move his body, and his legs are turned to ash, as he apologizes to Escanor in a desperate plea to live, as all of his pride and bravado is now gone, turned to dust. But Escanor gets up in his face, tells him, too late, you really hurt my feelings. As he bubbles away, with Escanor just breathing in his vicinity as the Vampire King explodes in a big ray of flames and light. As the Vampire King is killed, with the area of darkness being destroyed and Escanor's sunshine reshaping the environment into this crystallized form that we later see in 7 Deadly Sins after the commandments are revived, and as that is where their first real base to recuperate after being unsealed was at the beginning of the 10 Commandments arc, which is really nice to see, and how this thing was the way that it was. And after Escanor deals with the Vampire King, Merlin shows up as a distraction for Gothard to launch a blackout arrow, with Merlin amplifying it with her spell to knock out Escanor. As the last thing he says before he goes off to Dreamland is, what did you think of my poem, Merlin? As then, we truly get to see the big black bar of energy that is Meliodas sealing away Gelda, which we don't know at the time. And all we get to see is the aftermath, a massive crater, and Meliodas looking sternly at the hole. And we don't realize what it is until 7 Deadly Sins, obviously. And now everything wraps up, the Sins are back in Leonis, as they're all having a party celebrating their win, with Escanor just sitting off on the side, kind of being like, oh man, I did it again, I went overboard, I lost control of myself, oh man, everyone must be thoroughly put out with me by now, and all I can do is write these useless poems. But Merlin, with a basket of food and drink, goes up to Escanor and just asks him, would you mind reading those poems to me? Honestly, it's nice to see that Merlin, despite everything that goes on with her, does have some respect for Escanor and does actually hang out with him when things happen. So it's nice. It's actually really nice. It showcases why Escanor fell for her, but also shows that they did have some sort of friendly relationship outside of just being teammates and friends. It's just nice and wholesome. We get a brief image of Elizabeth looking at Meliodas as he's staring out off the porch, as he says, man, I hadn't heard his name in 3,000 years. Does that mean we're going to have to cross swords again sometime in the future? Hey Zeldris, as one panel focuses on the dragon handle on his back, with Meliodas saying, as you sleep under that seal, do you hate your worthless older brother, me? As that concludes the 7 Deadly Sins Vampires of Edinburgh prequel manga arc. Now this was really, really fun. Obviously, very, very short fights, but what do you expect? It's the Sins basically in their element at the very beginning, fighting against vampires that were freshly unsealed. And we get a lot of context for stuff that's mentioned in the main manga, obviously showcasing previous history, but we also get to see stuff that then gets revisited later on in the manga, like obviously Gelda, the area of Edinburgh, and what happened to it, and the vampire incident. A lot of stuff that is shown in this short arc is brought back in the main manga to fully flesh things out. Now, while this was fun, I do really wish that this was the first 7 Deadly Sins movie. Why? Because think about it. A prequel story, canon to the anime and manga, gets adapted, goes to theaters. You get to see all 7 Sins kind of in their prime as a team, before everything that happened, before they reached their true pinnacle forms, take on these vampires and just basically have a one-sided beatdown against these characters. It would have been a nice short movie and very entertaining, showcasing the Sins dynamic and how they worked back before the events of the story. And imagine the promotion of people getting to see the Lion Sin of Pride before he appears in the anime. The hype would have been insane if Escanor got his first debut on the big screen, but then you can later see him in the anime when season 2 dropped. It would have been awesome. It would have been a really cool hype moment. And maybe that would have made the movie sales do a lot better. And yeah, A1 probably wouldn't have dropped the anime, but who knows? That's just my hypothetical. But either way, this was fun. I liked it. I do wish this was part of the main manga, like a mini flashback or something, or put in the backs of the volumes of the main manga for all I care. It just feels like this is very important stuff that happened in the World of 7 Deadly Sins that adds additional context to later on in the manga post the revival of the commandments. Heck, the anime should have at least adapted these into some episodes, or at least in an OVA between seasons. That probably would have been the best. But hey, that's just me. Those are my thoughts. I love this. It was really fun to read, and I will read it again if I really need to. But what do you guys think? Do you enjoy this arc? Do you like this little mini prequel adventure? Do you like that our first introduction to Escanor canonically was through this before he appeared in the manga? And do you think this probably would have done better as the first 7DS Sins movie and have Escanor appear then before his appearance in Season 2? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. And what's more, if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. Now with all that said and done, I hope you all have an awesome day.